Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. We're going to have a bit of fun over the next few weeks with some easy embossing powder playtime. Easy embossing powder playtime. As alliterative as I could get it. I'm just going to share a couple of my favourite ways to use embossing powder. And yeah, they'll hopefully be fairly short, sharp, easy, clear little games to inspire you to get out your embossing powders and play with them. We'll start with one of my most used ways to exploit the joy of embossing powder, which is to allow something to stand out against a busy background. So I've got a few of the distress paint backgrounds we made in an earlier episode and some of the stenciled watercolor backgrounds from another one. I will link to those in the description below the video. And yeah, we're just going to use a few of these. I've got various brands on the table. These are some of the Emerald Creek Seth Apter powders, which are brilliant. The distress embossing glazes are around, though we may not use those today, given that what we're trying to do is make things really pop against a background. The distress glazes are transparent, translucent, so they're not necessarily the most in your face. I've got some metallics. I've got several wow embossing powders, including my favorites for really getting something to show. The primary bark, nice and dark. Earth tone pepper can be useful. And yeah, clear, white. We'll move on as we go through to using embossing resists and also to using embossing powder with textures. So make sure you are subscribed if you would like to be here for that. Set the bell notification ready to go. But yeah, let's kick straight in with a couple. I think these two are going to be on the mat today. Those distress paint backgrounds, which have got lots going on in them, but they're still intended to be backgrounds. So we'll see what we can do to make something pop against those, and maybe a couple of these as well. These, yeah, stenciled watercolor ones. But I'm starting here because they're the ones drawing my attention at the moment. And my brain is already thinking that maybe what I might want here is going to be something like the primary bark so that it has a real presence. But we could also compare that with something like maybe an opaque turquoise. Might be quite nice to get into it. This is a set by Stampendous of, yeah, I picked them up because you know how I love my blues and greens and browns. And they're all in here. Picked them up a long time ago. I really don't know whether they're still available or not, but for the sake of comparison, we maybe should do some embossing glaze so that you can really see how that gives you a different kind of effect. This Seth Apter duck one is quite nice as well. So between those powders, we're going to have a look at what's what. Obviously, I'm often drawn to my own botanicals. And I think I might start with these twisted Umbels. You can see they've got quite a lot of delicate detail. So getting them to show against a background like this with just ink would be pretty tricky. Now, most people, when they think of embossing powders, will think they need to use an embossing ink with them. I occasionally do that, but you're much more likely to see me stamping either with distress inks or with even an archival, particularly when I'm doing a detailed image. I find that the embossing ink, because it's so sticky in order to grab the powder, sometimes gives you a bit of a squidgy image. It's a little bit blurry when you're working with a fine detail stamp, and obviously lots of my quotes from the early collections of quote stamps are very detailed to get the text to show. You got something like these fine twisted Umbels, that's quite detailed. And I've found that if I use an embossing ink, the image it grabs too much powder, and therefore you get a slightly blurry image by the time you've heat embossed the powder. So I think what I'm going to do is use an archival ink on these, but I want one of my archival inks that's got a decent amount of juice on. If it's an ink pad that's almost dried out, you may find you can't get quite enough moisture to grab the powders. I'm quite tempted to try a turquoisey one, but I think I'm going to start with primary bark so that you can see that even with a background this kind of busy and detailed and so much going on, you can still get a really good popping image. What I'm very good at is forgetting to have my piece of catching paper standing by. So I've got a number of pieces of catching paper ready on standby. The garden is delighted because we're finally getting some proper heavy rain here. It means it's a little bit gloomy here today, but I can't say no. The garden is thrilled to have the water table filling up again. It's been such a dry start to the summer, dry spring, dry start to the summer. So I'm getting firm pressure down all the way over, making sure that ink gets onto the tag. These, of course, are fully dry because they've been around for a couple of weeks already. There's my primary bark. You can see, I mean, that's not bad, but it doesn't really take the eye as an image. But as soon as we get this very dark embossing powder on, these umbels, already even before melting, can suddenly capture your attention, even against a background that dark, busy. And of course the background immediately starts to melt into what it is, a background, because we've given ourselves a focal image that will really take the eye. I'm not going to do lots of heat embossing on camera because I know that can be quite noisy and quite annoying. If we do some metallics, I might do that because that is a magical moment when the plastic suddenly melts. But it is just a question of watching and seeing that moment when you see the plastic particles begin to adhere and cohere. Right, I'm going to heat emboss this and I'll be back. And there they are. The other great joy, of course, about embossing an image like this is that once that plastic is melted, it's there for good. So anything else I add after this can't disturb it. It's melted, it's on there, it's going nowhere, and that's done. And because that is now such a strong focal point, any additional stamping I do, if I keep it just in ink, will be soft and subtle and in the background. So if I were to go with that very same colour, the Beach Cruiser, that I used just as my ink to hold the powder, but I now add some of that in subtle background details here, that's again not going to take away from this powerful central image that we've got. That's going to stay as our main focus. Let's get ourselves another little bit of something going on. Oh, except I've just seen this one here, this little bit of ephemera. Lovely clock diagram that I think I want to add as well. So I'm going to do that in a dark brown. This is the ground espresso distress ink, but in archival formulation. So it's a distress colour, but it's an archival ink. I did it as I bought the refill and put it into an empty ink pad, the DIY custom blend ink pads. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit of this around these as well. So even though this is going in a dark brown, it's only an inky dark brown. It's not a full embossed dark brown, and it's such a fine detail stamp that again, that's not in any way going to detract from the power of our focal image now that we've got it safely embossed and present. Anything I'm adding falls into the background compared to that really bold look. I'm just thinking this might be a place to compare with something like the translucent embossing glaze. That's the Salvaged Patina. What other embossing glazes have I got on the table? Bundled Sage. Don't really want to go green on here, I don't think. Let's try one of these with maybe the other little botanical stamp that's in here, this shredded glass, stem of grass. I don't know where my brain went just then, but I do need to make sure that this other background stamping is fully dry. Otherwise my powder is going to cling to that when I do this stamping. So another little blast with the heat gun to make sure everything on here is dry before I stamp for some more embossing powder. the main thing to remember in the difference between an opaque embossing powder and using one of the distressed glazes is that the colour you stamp in is going to make a difference with this. If I stamp in another turquoise, it will become more turquoise. If I stamp in something like a pale grey, that will give me a different shade of turquoise. If I stamp in the embossing ink, which is clear, then what I'll get is a completely sort of translucent version of Salvaged Patina. If I were to stamp in something like a purple or a red, that is going to change the tone of the colour here, because it will be as though I'm mixing it with that colour. So I think possibly for, an experimental, oh, hang on, that's not on the mat fully. I'm going to use this Lost Shadow, which is a pale grey, which should really keep the Salvaged Patina pretty much Salvaged Patina, but might just lighten it a little bit. We'll see. I'm going to put just a couple of stems at varying heights here. Distress inks are juicy enough that I don't need to get the powder straight on there. If you're stamping in an archival ink with embossing powder, it's a pretty good idea to get the powder on quite quickly, because that archival ink might dry quite quickly. In the case of distress inks, as I say, you've probably got enough playtime. And if you're using an embossing ink, you've got loads of playtime, because those sticky embossing inks really take their time about drying. Let's see what we've got. So on there, I can see it has it maybe caught a couple of those letters? No, I think we're good. It's really mostly on those grasses. And I think this is going to be a lovely translucent effect once I get it embossed. So back into there. You can see why it's important to have your paper around, ready to catch the powder you throw on quite carelessly. Let's close this up. This might be quite a quick emboss, so I'll do it on camera. And if the noise is too annoying, you might need to turn it down. Right about now, I'm using this Wow embossing gun as opposed to my Ranger one, specifically formulated for heat embossing. So it should happen quite quickly, but it's quite noisy. So I hope you could see that moment as that plastic melts. And yes, it's one of the other things I adore about embossing powder, is you get this wonderful light catching, now you see me, now you don't effect with embossed parts of imagery. So that, again, they're in the background because it's a translucent powder, because it's a paler powder than we have been using. It's a turquoise, not a dark brown. But that gives me another layer within what's going on there that is really quite exciting. So the different effect of a different kind of embossing powder, so the embossing glaze as opposed to an opaque powder, can be quite profound and can be quite a lovely thing to add into a layer. Just wondering about doing some opaque turquoise onto here. Very tempted by Seth's duck egg, but I think duck. Or maybe it does say duck egg. No, it says duck. Maybe I'll save that for the watercolor backgrounds in a minute. I'm going to do these same Umbels because I think it gives us the fairest kind of comparison, and it's against similar colors on the background. We use lots of tumbled glass, maybe frayed burlap, maybe walnut stain in those painty ones. Take a look at that video if you want to know the colours that we used there. I'm back to an opaque powder now. I'm going to use these Stampendous ones. I might even mix them together, I think, because I think together they're going to do quite a nice thing. So again, it doesn't matter which ink colour I use underneath. So let's go Beach Cruiser again, same as we used for the primary bark. And this is just going to get us our initial image. Everything here is dry. We made this background days ago, so that should be fine. I think I'm going to aim to get the heads. Maybe we'll tilt in a slightly different direction. Firm contact so that I get that ink transferring onto the card. And then, because this is an archival, once I lift this up, I'm going to try and move fairly rapidly. So you can see they're there, but they're not massively visible. I'm going to go with some of that and some of this one. And then when I put them away, I'll just save them in a slightly different place. I think that's going to be quite fun to have those two colours mixing. So I'm not going to put them back in their own. Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, there is something really nice about having both the green and the blue there in slightly different places. A little pat will enable them to just mix and shiver onto every little bit of that stamped image. And then, yes, I've usually got little pots hanging around. Let me see if I can find one to tip this mixed powder into, because that's now a custom mix embossing powder to play with. Yep, here we go, a little plastic lidded pot. You can usually pick these up in sort of dollar store type places, 10 in a pack for maybe a couple of euro or a couple of bucks, as long as you're lucky. So I'm going to tip this custom blend into here, and then I've got a ready mixed version of these two colours to play with next time out. And we all know how much I love those blues and turquoisey colours. Good, I'm going to give this a quick little blast with the heat gun and be back to show you the results. Or maybe what I'll do is blast with the heat gun and play you some music while I do it, so you get to see that magic embossing moment. There they are, beautifully kind of popping against those dark shadowy browns in the background. Really tasty. Just gonna check this bit's fully done. Noise warning. Yeah, I think we were fine. It's all good. So again, anything I add to this, I can add more moisture, I can add more liquid. These are going nowhere now that they are embossed, so I can add little bits of background stamping detail, which I might do with this. Where's my brown gone? Sort of want to do, I think I quite fancy a little brown stem here and there. Again, subtle against this distress paint background. And again, if you were wondering when we did the distress paint ones whether you can stamp over the backgrounds, here's your answer. Definitely possible to stamp over distress paint. There we go, that's giving us just a little grounding for those stems. And yeah, already rather enjoying that little comparison between those two. Let's do a little bit of green stuff on some of these watercolor backgrounds. I think maybe that one. This one I like so much as a background, I'm not sure I'm ready to stamp on it yet. But these two, I feel like, are quite busy, and it's any image I stamp on here is going to need some help to pop against this background. I think I'm going to trim them down to tag size and go from there. I wasn't sure when I made the backgrounds whether I would want the borders or not, but I have now decided for this particular case that I don't. So they're now gone. I almost just did some ink blending around this corner and then realised that if I do that right now, that is going to catch my embossing powder. So I will wait until I've done my stamping and embossing and then add some ink around the bottom after that. I wonder, maybe I'll switch to grasses now, or maybe, well, maybe I'll keep going with this Umbel. I'm really rather enjoying it. Or we go for some, no, let's stick to what we've got on the mat, because I think that's quite fun to do as a point of comparison. So here's a Distress Glaze in Bundled Sage. That's going to be quite subtle, so I might save that for our bonus stamp. And to get these to pop, I'm just wondering if I want to go for something really full on, like the primary bark, or maybe we go for something gentler. There's a green, isn't there, in this embossing set? So maybe we take a nice kind of olivey green for these. Let's give that a go. I've also got this rather nice African Sea, no, beg its pardon, Aegean Sea. Who's ever heard of the African Sea? The Aegean Sea might be quite nice as a blue against these. So let's do one in blue and one in green. Why not? Again, I think I'm not going to stamp in embossing ink for now. When we start to do some using these embossing powders as resists next time round, I might well use the embossing ink, because I know I'll want a good helping of powder to sustain a resist against other impacts. So let's put this one here, coming in from this side again. And yeah, I've got that, this head is really heading into some of those slightly darker colours. It's going to take quite a lot to show up against there. So I think we'll do the green for this one then. And again, you can see that as an image is really almost hiding within this background here. Let's see if a little coating of a really vibrant olivey green embossing powder can help make that image pop even against a background this busy. And you can see even before I've done the melting, that's already helping those delicate detailed stems to have some presence against here. If you're using a really sort of thick, full, solid kind of image, you may not even need embossing powder, even against a background like this. But I think it's always worth experimenting with how something like the embossing powder can let these subtle, delicate images have a presence of their own. I'm going to go straight away with the next stamping and adding. Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever used the Aegean Sea, so it's about time it came out to play. So inking up again, same thing, the beach cruiser. Oops, that's one thing to watch out for if you are doing multiples at a time. Don't knock this powder off while it's still just powder. It will come flying off the paper. So let's tilt you in from that direction, just to get ourselves a different angle on things. And let's take the Aegean Sea, and then I'm going to use maybe some Salvaged Patina again, and maybe some Bundled Sage to add the extra little stem. That's, I mean, it's a subtler background, so that is slightly more able to hold its own, but I think that a bit of additional embossing powder might give us an even better shot at seeing those delicate stems. Embossing powders do come in different thicknesses, so you can get really quite chunky ones which have large granules, and they'll create lots and lots of texture for you, and that's brilliant. We'll have a look at some of those in another episode hopefully. But again, if you're doing a really fine image, one of these finer kinds of powders will get you more detail. If I use a really chunky embossing powder on a fine detail image like this, it will, again, like using the embossing ink, give you a slightly blurry, chunky image. I think we might go for the music option again, so that you get the embossing moment of magic. another little tip, or really a word of warning, if you're working on quite an absorbent paper like these are the embossing, these backgrounds are on watercolor paper, there does come a moment very often where the embossing powder seems to sort of over melt, and then it sinks into the paper and you lose the light catching quality. I think I just managed to hold on to it on most of that, but just be warned, it won't do anything, it won't run away, it will be there, but it won't be quite as sort of prominent and shiny as it would be if you go that little bit less far. Sometimes on an absorbent paper it does just sort of, yeah, dry up almost immediately, and you don't get that chance to have your shininess, but the image will be more prominent and it will be permanent. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, really. It's not a desperate problem if it happens, but just be warned that sometimes you will notice that your image has somehow sort of see, I thought I was going for Lost Shadow and I ended up with the embossing ink. They're both grey on the top. I reached for the wrong one. I think I want to stick to, I'm going to stick to Distress ink for this. I felt it immediately because the embossing ink sits on a different kind of sponge. These pads are quite hard, quite firm, so you get a firm contact. The embossing ink pads are very spongy and they sort of press down around the image. It's another reason you get slight blurriness, is that they've clung to the side of the image, and I didn't wipe it off necessarily very fully, so I may find that I've got a slightly chunky image for some of these stampings. That's really interesting. I didn't get any kind of secondary stamping from that because the ink itself sank into the paper so fast. So that's a little warning to me that if I want to get embossing powder onto these, I might need to operate quite quickly. I'm really loving the Lost Shadow grey here. So rather than a colourful ink powder, rather than the colourful embossing powder at this point, I think I'm going to add some clear. And what clear will do is preserve the colour of ink that I've got there already. All it will do is mean that that Distress ink that I just stamped in, which would remain water reactive and therefore vulnerable to anything I add the other way, will instead be set. It'll go nowhere. It'll operate almost as an archival ink. So it's a way to set your Distress inks. Another brilliant use of an embossing powder, this time a clear one. So those lovely pale grey stems are now clear embossed. They're not going anywhere. They'll stay put, even if I now bring in, as I had planned to do much earlier on, a little bit of green inking. It won't smudge, it won't blur. It'll stay put because it's got its own little protective casing in the form of that clear embossing powder. So it's a way to hold your images even if you've stamped in Distress inks. I like that quite a lot. On this one I am going to go, I think I'm going to stick to green. So I'm going to go Bundled Sage, which as we know is quite a subtle green. But if I stamp in a full-on green, then the two will combine and get me something somewhere in between. If I were to stamp in Bundled Sage, it would stay very, very subtle. I think I might go with a Mowed Lawn. So this should be quite a bright green as I stamp it, but then might get a little bit dulled down by the Bundled Sage over the top. So quite full on, quite green, Mowed Lawn. Going on like so. Maybe a little secondary one that will be a bit paler. And one more coming up from the side. Maybe like so. Then I'm going to come in, actually it might be fun to come in with the Salvaged Patina. No, stick to the plan. Let's go Bundled Sage. So this is back to the Distress Glazes, which are transparent, translucent. So as I say, the colour you stamp in will make a difference to the colour they turn up. I should probably do, okay, I'm going to do one or two with the Lost Shadow as well. Let's get these embossed first, and then maybe we'll go for a direct comparison. So that's Bundled Sage over Mowed Lawn, and we do have one secondary stamping in there, so that's paler. And now I'm just going to have a look at Bundled Sage over, for instance, the Lost Shadow. So this is that very pale grey, and should get us a slightly different tone when we put the Bundled Sage over the top of it. So it should create a kind of layering effect, hopefully putting the slightly paler or lighter ones more into the background. Let's see how much difference it makes. Obviously there are colours that are, oh, that was a very juicy stamping. There are colours that are further apart than Mowed Lawn and Lost Shadow. If you were to put this over a dark, dark blue, that would be another thing again. But let's put some Bundled Sage over this Lost Shadow and see what we get. That one, as you can see, really, really juicy. And you can see what I mean about the image sort of being blurrier than these ones where I got a finer stamping. That's a very helpful example of what I've been talking about quite a lot in this video, about how much difference it can make, the ink you use under your embossing powders. One fine little blast with the heat gun and I'll be back. I think that's delicious. In between our green stems, we've now got some sort of grey-green stems. Obviously, I, as a lover of grey, couldn't be happier to have grey-green stems alongside my green stems. So green Bundled Sage over the Mowed Lawn, very different kind of a thing from Bundled Sage over the Lost Shadow. And that's, I was rudely interrupted by my phone telling me my storage was full. So I've already rapidly deleted some things and I come back to just finish off with you. So yes, a big difference when you're using translucent or transparent glazes. Clear glazes, same thing. What you stamp with underneath is the colour you will get. But if you're using opaques, then you can stamp with anything. But bear in mind that the kind of ink you use will affect the detail of the image that you end up with. I hope that's a helpful little sort of first glimpse into some of the ways I like to use embossing powders and glazes. As I say, we'll move on into doing some resist work and doing some work with texture. I'm probably going to pop a bit of twine through the tops of these. Well, maybe not, because I don't think they're finished. I think there are words. There might even be some pictures to add. So I'm going to continue to think of these as backgrounds for now. I will dive in for a close-up so you can have a look at some of these embossed textures. But thank you, as always, for your company. I hope these easy embossing powder playtime videos will encourage you to go shopping in your stash, dig out those old embossing powders if they haven't been out for a while, and have a little play. Thanks so much for your company. If you've enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, we'd love to have your company. Check the description below the video for the ingredients used today, as well as links to these backgrounds that we made in previous episodes. Thanks so much, and happy crafting all.